So I'm here with Professor Samir Zeki, who is a professor of neuroaesthetics at University College London. And I think it's fair to say one of the world's experts on the neuroscience of beauty. And Professor Zeki, I know that we tend to think of beauty as something that is subjective, maybe you have your taste and I have my taste. But in fact, the neuroscience is giving us a very different picture today, right?
Yes, I think the general direction it's moving in is that it is subjective in some instances, but not in others. And of course, you know, and I know that the best way to kill a conversation at dinner is when beauty comes up, say it's all subjective. But actually, if you take something, an entity which belongs to the category which I would call biological beauty, human faces, human bodies, perhaps natural scenes, um, falls, you'd find that people are in significant agreement about, and when I say significant agreement, I mean across cultural and ethnic groups. So a very beautiful person in, say, Japan, a very beautiful person would be considered to be very beautiful in Europe and in Africa and in Latin America and vice versa. And the same is true of very ugly people. And you find the variability there shrinks so that it has a universal assent. This has universal assent, and therefore, if you have an outside observer, he would say, "Well, look," or she would say, "Well, look, all these people seem to be agreeing on this, so it must be rather objective." If, on the other hand, you choose to look at the beauty of buildings, well, then you will find big variabilities because people may prefer temples, they may prefer churches or mosques or synagogues, whatever.
So there's this idea of the social construction of beauty, and there does seem to be a place. You're acknowledging that, but perhaps it's we could use an analogy of a bush, or where you're coming from a common biological root, and then we're all getting off into our more specific. Interests and concerns and perhaps schools of thought. And this is where also it seems to me professionals need to be a bit careful, because if we as architects, and I'm that's my background, I have a PhD in architecture, and I speak with some guilt about the profession having a difference in its aesthetic judgments from most of the people who actually live in the places that we make for them. So if we're making those places not just for ourselves, but for them, then shouldn't we be taking very seriously, much more seriously than we are perhaps, what they actually want and prefer, and moreover, perhaps need in those environments?
Yes, I think absolutely right. I'm with you all the way. And I think that there has been, in London especially, but not only in London, I think Athens is another city like that. There's been a wanton destruction and a very, very eclectic sort of chaotic building. But beauty has not featured strongly. Now, you see, the important thing is that there is. Let's go to. I'm sorry to jump like that very quickly, but let's go to Freud's pleasure principle. So Freud would say that one of the aims in life is to satisfy the pleasure principle. Actually, the person who said that before him was Jeremy Bentham, who was the founder of this college.
Right.
Now, the medial orbitofrontal cortex, which is active, the part of the brain that correlates in which activity correlates with the experience of with aesthetic experiences, it also is the part of the brain which in which activity correlates with the experience of pleasure. Now, these parts of the brain don't sit there just for waiting to be stimulated. They need to be stimulated all the time. And I think there is a certain joy in coming to a nice place with nice surroundings, a pleasurable place to come to. And I think the American experience, you are in America, are you not, at the moment?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that there was an example in the United States, in Missouri, actually, where they had to bulldoze several buildings because they were well known for their ugliness
The
and ultimately
Pruitt-Igoe
spread
project.
violence and all sorts of things like that. So I consider, from my perspective, from my neurobiological perspective, that beauty in architecture is not a luxury; it is a necessity.
Yeah.
And it's a pity that people don't pay more attention. Now, I understand that there are all sorts of different demands on an architect. There's the economics, there's the material, there is the setting. There are all these. You can't build a building of more than 10 stories, let us say, or more than 2 stories. I understand that, but within that, it should be possible. I mean, I can really take you to areas of London which are really miserable. I mean, really miserable. And I can't believe that people look forward to coming to these places at all.
Right. Well, it seems to me that this is really a question of professional responsibility and even a duty of care. You know, if we think of ourselves truly as professionals who have a duty of care to the people that we're entrusted to build their built environments. And as you're saying, and as the research seems to indicate, there is an impact on their health and their well-being. I love what you said about that the experience of beauty does something to the brain. It nourishes the emotional brain, I
Yes,
think is the phrase that
yes,
you put. Yeah.
because it nourishes it, and it is that area is there to be active. I mean,
Yep.
these areas don't sit there in idleness, and they have to be active. This is true of not only architecture, of many other things as well, but it is especially true of architecture, because I think the problem lies partly with the fact that maybe these neurobiological facts should be better known, but it also lies partly in the fact that there are too many demands on an architect, I think. He does not. It's not like, for example, let us take the example of an opera producer. They give him the money, they give him the stage, and they tell him to get on with it. With an architect, they tell you can only build here, you can only build to these dimensions. You can so many people can live here, so it becomes a struggle.
Well, that's certainly something we're talking about at our conference, the sort of operating system that every architect and every builder, every environmental designer has to deal with on some level. And those things need to be reformed, certainly. But it also seems to me, and this is something we'll be talking about at the conference, that the ideology of architecture as something that is novel, this sort of fascination with the neoplastic approach. It's got to be something totally radical and different and expressive, and it can't look anything like something that happened before. This seems to me to become pathological because if beauty is something that is familiar in certain ways. The mathematical patterns, the fractal patterns, and the other things that I know you and your work and others have identified, those are in a way recurrent, right? They're part of our evolutionary history and in environments that we've been experiencing for hundreds of thousands of years, and we need those in our environment. So when we're totally disrupting our environments and creating something radically new and perhaps shocking and expressive of our concerns or our angst or our creative impulses, are we not damaging potentially the well-being of the people who are there?
Well, indeed we are. But I mean, let's take an example. How many people flock every year to Venice, which is an old place? By the
Right,
way, Venice has changed very little. I mean, you can recognize every building from Canaletto's paintings.
right.
Uh, but how many people would rush to a ghastly suburb in the south of London?
Yeah.
There's nobody there. I personally don't understand why one has to chase. Well, I do understand you may want to chase novelty, but the priority for me as a neurobiologist would be to chase beauty.
Yeah.
That would be the priority. Now there are some architects who I think do produce beautiful things, and they're doing it in a very modern way. My favorite, uh, and not everybody agrees with me, is Frank Gehry.
Hmm.
I think Frank Gehry's these buildings are very beautiful. Now, it's interesting about Frank Gehry that more people go to Bilbao to see the museum not the inside of the museum, not Bilbao, but to see the building. He has managed to create something really beautiful. I think the same is true for this Hollywood, uh, Los Angeles. He built something.
The Disney Theater.
Yes, yes, yeah, that's the one. Yes, yes.
Right.
Well,
Yeah,
I
I
think
mean, it does show, doesn't it, that it's possible to build beautiful buildings or buildings that many people regard as beautiful today.
yes,
Um,
yes.
but the other dimension of this that I think a lot of people have pointed out, and that we will certainly talk about in the conference, is the ecological dimension of this, because not only are we impacting human well-being, perhaps we're impacting planetary well-being in the sense of uh, buildings and environments that are durable, that are well cared for, because they're well loved and because they're beautiful. Do you see a connection there?
Um, not as much as I see it with a beautiful surrounding,
Yeah.
but the beautiful surrounding integrates into the environment. Now, let me just tell you that I've just returned from Greece,
Hmm.
and you know, stayed in a hotel which had a nice view over the Acropolis, a very beautiful. It is breathtaking.
Hmm.
It's 2,500 years old.
Yeah.
To sit there and to have a drink, and it is deeply, deeply. The building is very, very inspiring. Now, I think that is, in a sense, it fits so well ecologically in the context. It's on a hill, and it is quite marvelous. But I think the essential element there to me is the beauty.
Mm-hmm. Hmm.
Um, but I think maybe we are not talking at cross purposes. I think maybe we are after the same thing. I mean, I think a very very beautiful building would have to be in a suitable setting. Now
And
there is also the temple of Poseidon I saw this time, angry Poseidon. Um, Again, in a beautiful surrounding. I mean, you can take pictures of it. It's very, very inspiring. It's very inspiring.
right. Well, the other dimension of this is, of course, the kinds of urban environments that we're creating. Are they environments where people want to walk, for example, and want to get out and meet other people and socialize? Or do they, if they find them ugly and unattractive, do they retreat into their buildings and their cars and their, shopping malls, perhaps? This is maybe another dimension of the sustainability argument, is it not?
Absolutely. I'm not sure, I'm not aware of an experiment in this, but I'm sure that people will retreat from ugly surroundings and return to the building. Now, there is a concept in architecture, I think, which I'm very attached to, and that's the concept of defensible space.
Mhm.
The sort of space which is yours, and you can decorate it in any way you want. And I think that architects should pay some attention to this. And I think the concept should be expanded. The defensible space is also the space outside your apartment, outside the garden, the setting. I
Mhm.
mean, imagine. I heard not longer in London, a very, very nice setting where the garden started to be used for drug dealers. All right, so that upset the whole balance of the beauty of the place.
Right. Right. It's quite fascinating. Yeah, because I think at our conference we are going to be talking about well, of course, we're at Poundbury, and one of the goals at Poundbury was to de-emphasize the car, and um, rebalance, if you will, walking and biking and other forms of transportation, the bus lines and so on, and not get rid of the car, but create an environment where people want to walk, want to get out and interact with each other. There has been some interesting research on that, and quite encouraging. And I know there's been research also on levels of stress that are produced. I'm not sure how much you've been involved in some of that research, but the stress that is created from the experience of ugly environments, particularly ugly urban environments. Is that something
Well,
you,
I have not been directly experimentally involved in it, but I have been very much involved in the stress created by walking into ugly environments.
right?
But there is something which is interesting in what you say, which is perhaps worth studying. For example, the design of houses of parliament uh, is very critical in terms of I gather that the British House of Parliament is not the most conducive. Uh, Others, which have got a more sort of amphitheater type of appearance, apparently are more. I don't know the truth about that, but certainly I think it is a function of an architect to go for the optimal design that would encourage communication.
Right.
And my goodness, I mean, Richard Wagner had to copy the theater in Greece, Epidavros, to get what he wanted, the perfect sound.
Right.
Right? And these architects were geniuses. They were total geniuses.
Well, why not use the genius of other figures of the past? This is our collective intelligence, so to speak. And the idea that we shouldn't use it because it's old, because we are modern and somehow we need to move on, seems to me very destructive. It's denying very important resources that we need, does it not?
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. I think if we and the architects and everybody else who's in a sort of in public business got together and said, look, forget about modern stuff or old stuff, just concentrate on beautiful stuff.
Yeah, the best stuff you can find, the most beautiful.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, and you can forget everything else. You will create a socially more sustainable society, a better society.
I certainly
By
think
the way, I mean, we all spend quite a big fortune on the interiors of our houses
so. Right.
to beautify because it's something important to come home to, or something
Right,
nice.
right. Well, you mentioned the Houses of Parliament, and that was the origin of Churchill's famous remark. He was talking about rebuilding Parliament after the bombing, and he said, we shape our buildings, and thereafter they shape us.
Yes,
And
yes.
isn't
Well, they
that
do.
true?
They
Yeah.
do. They do. They do. Yes, that's
So
good.
on that note, I want to thank you so much for joining us, and we will certainly give you a report back on the conference and the discussion, and I look forward to continuing dialogue and
Of course,
perhaps collaboration in the
we will.
future.
And I wish you every success. I'm terribly sorry that I cannot come, but these things happen.
These
But
things
I'm
happen.
sure, I hope above all that you will disseminate the results of the meeting so that people who are in a public meeting would understand how important it is
Yeah,
to emphasize beauty in architecture. Thank you so much.
we absolutely will. Thank you so much. So I'm here with my good friend Nikos Salingaros, who is a professor of mathematics at the University of Texas. And more than a professor of mathematics, he is a great scholar of urbanism and of the complexities of urbanism, the mathematical qualities of urbanism, and of, I would say, human places, right, Nikos? That's probably a better way to put it.
Yes, yes. Urban structure makes sense only if it's built for humans and human activity and human
Right.
health.
Right. And we were just talking earlier about that great quote from Henry David Thoreau, the greatest art is to shape the quality of the day, which I love. And I think it really encapsulates the cognitive shift that we have to make as designers to recognize that it's human beings that we're designing for, and not just the conscious awareness of human beings, but the full human being, the impacts on their well-being, the impacts on their levels of stress and their levels of enjoyment and their levels of contact with other human beings and with the things that they need in the city. That's really a different way of thinking, isn't it?
Michael, you opened Pandora's box. You and I, Christopher Alexander, many of our friends, just pull out our hair at the way cities have evolved in the last century, being built as children's blocks without any concern of the people who
Yeah.
inhabit them, and the feelings, the sensibilities, the the neural reactions of the people to the forms and the connections and the paths, all that used to make a city livable. All that was overnight, all that was ignored in order to create giant sculptures.
It seems like we've really cut ourselves off at the neck, so to speak, and we only experience the city as this sort of conscious creation of artists and technical specialists, as opposed to a city as a place that we all share and co-create and co-evolve as something that we all experience, right?
I totally agree with you, Michael. And if we go back to our late friend Christopher Alexander, he discovered that what really creates the living city is 99% hidden. It is the emotions, the unconscious reaction of the body, and it's really what drives us to experience the city and to interact and to enjoy our life, and to cope with the stress. And all of that is forgotten because attention is paid to the most superficial 1%.
Yeah.
So we are really losing the 99% of the forces that drive good design of the living city. And we ask ourselves why people are so unhappy and stressed in cities that are technically supposed to be well designed and built. Well, they're not, because they're causing stress and nobody's paying any attention to it.
And we talk about cities, and of course we could talk about small towns too, and larger towns, and people who are dissatisfied and don't quite know what's wrong with their lives, and that manifests in all kinds of ways. But you know, if we're not comfortable in our own lives, in our own selves, in our own communities, if we're not contacting with other human beings and building a life together, then we shouldn't be surprised that there are all kinds of dysfunctions that result from that, and all of the things that we see in contemporary society that are going haywire currently. One of the things we're going to talk about at the conference is the rebellion, the architectural rebellion, as it has been described by a lot of people who are not architects, who are saying, look, we don't accept this, we want to protest this. And there's a tendency to simply dismiss them as, well, there's some kind of populists who are on the fringe and they don't matter, and maybe they're ideologically extreme and so on. And I want to defend that form of populism. I think populism as such is not the issue, and it can be, as we all know, ideologically very diverse. You could have left-wing populism and right-wing populism and centrist populism and all the rest of it. But the question is, are people reacting to something that's real, that they're concerned about? And then you can ask the next question is, well, are they identifying it correctly? And are they perhaps being misguided by forces in the culture that are opportunists and are taking advantage of them, manipulating them, and so on? That's a different question than, do they have a reason to be unhappy with the state of the world today? And I think we ought to be sympathetic to that. I think we ought to try to listen and understand what those concerns are, because in many cases they do, I believe, have their roots in the experience of place and its dysfunctions, and the lack of a sense of community, the lack of sense of contact with other human beings that great cities and towns and rural settlements have given us in, for many centuries now.
Well, the architectural rebellion in Scandinavia is one of the bright spots in the future, one of the brightest spots in the future. They have my total support, and I'm in contact with them. And they are different groups within each Scandinavian country, and they are cooperating. It is a phenomenally positive thing.
And they're spreading, of course. There's in the UK,
yes,
in the United States now.
But you posed two important questions. Let me try to answer them. First of all, they are responding to a gut feeling that new parts of cities and new buildings are just inhuman. Mm-hmm. The medical experiment shows that the body reacts with stress. There's this harmful, these environments and buildings are actually harmful to human health. And the architectural rebellion have realized this intuitively. And because this is a relatively new organization, it is reading the medical experiments. and which justify the gut feeling. The second point you made is about political orientation. Well, I went to Stockholm for my architecture prize a few years ago, and I met everyone in person. It is completely the whole rainbow of politics, from extreme and dangerous left-wing people and anarchists all together in the same room,
Yep.
all
Agreeing on something.
agreeing with aristocrats and plutocrats and everyone in between. And
Yeah.
they agree because they see that this is true, and they will save their cities.
Yeah, it's inspiring in that sense, that to see people agreeing. And I do believe that working on place, working on our own built environment and our own neighborhoods, our own communities, is something that can bring us together across ideological divides, because it is such a practical thing, such a basic thing. Do we love the place where we live? Are we able to experience each other and experience our community in a healthy way? And that is not an ideological question, of course. It's something that does bring all human beings together across ideological divides. So on that note, Nikos, thank you so much for joining us. And I wish you could be here in person, but I'm so glad that we were able to talk and we were able to share this with our audience.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you, Michael. Thank you for doing everything that you have done.